This is CPRmetro.org, Community Progressive Radio for the Metropolitan New York area and the world. And we're back with the second part of our coverage of the 2003 War on Iraq in commemoration of February 15th, 2003, 10 years ago, when the world said no to war. Turn now to Senator Robert Byrd speaking in front of the U.S. Senate on October 10th, 2002 in the deliberation for the resolution authorizing President George Bush to commence the Iraq War, which he did in March of the following year. This is Senator Robert Byrd.
It's fact. These are, for the record. One of the lessons we learned at the World Trade Center on September 11 was that our fire personnel could not communicate by radio with police personnel. That local officials could not communicate with state and regional personnel. When the president decided to block the $2.5 billion, he blocked the $100 million that we approved to help state and local governments across the land to solve the problem, and $90 million to provide medical assistance to the first responders at the World Trade Center was lost. What is the president's solution to the imminent threat to our nation's homeland security? Rhetoric? Yes. More bureaucracy? Yes. Resources to respond to the immediate threat? No. Mr. President, with reference to this commander-in-chief business that we hear about. Oh, the commander-in-chief, they say. I listen to my friends across the aisle here talk about the commander-in-chief. We must do this for the commander-in-chief. We must stand shoulder. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with the commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief. Of what is he commander-in-chief? Of the Army, the Navy, and the militia of the several states. But who provides the Army and the Navy? Who provides for the calling out of the militia of the several states? Congress. So much for the so-called, for the term commander-in-chief. Charles I used that term in 1639. Commander-in-chief. You know what happened to Charles I of England? The swordsman cut off Charles I's head on January the 30th, 1649. So much for the commander-in-chief. Parliament and the king in England fought a war. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine Congress fighting a war with the President of the United States? They did that in England. Yes. Parliament and the king fought a war. Who lost? The king. Who was he? King Charles I. And a high court convened on January the 1st, I believe it was, 1649, and within 30 days they had cut Charles I's head off, severed it from his body. So much for Charles I. That was a commander-in-chief. Yeah. Hail to the chief. Hail to the chief. Hail to the chief. Well, I respect the president just as much as anybody else does. But the barons at Runnymede on the banks of the Thames on June 15, 1215, took it upon themselves to let the king know that there was a law and that kings had to live by the law, just as did barons and others. So I don't know who's talking to this president down here. I don't know who among his crowd down there is trying to pump him up. But my friends, this president of the United States is president by virtue of this Constitution. He was created by this Constitution that I hold in my hand, which says in Article 2 that the president shall be commander-in-chief. Article 2 of the Constitution. Constitution has it. And yet this administration refers to the Constitution in this National Security Strategy of the United States of America, printed on September 2002, refers to the Constitution not even with a capital letter. The Constitution, America's Constitution. What's the matter with those people? Haven't they studied the Constitution down there at the other end of the avenue? Well, they'd better become aware that there is a Constitution. And that Constitution refutes this resolution on which Congress is about to vote to give to the President of the United States the power to determine the use of the military forces, when he will use them, where he will use them, how long he will use them. It's this Constitution. And you better believe it, may I say to those who advise the President. I think the President is probably a much better individual by himself, but somebody's giving him bad advice. So here's what Hamilton said. Let's read what Hamilton says. You know, he's one of the three authors of the Federalist Papers. Hamilton, that man who was shot to death in Weehawken, New Jersey, shot on the 11th of July, 1804. He died on the 12th of July, 1804. Shot by the Vice President of the United States. Murdered by the Vice President of the United States. Alexander Hamilton. Let's hear what he has to say in the Federalist paper, number 69. Read it. These are the Federalist Papers. There are 85 of them, written by Jay, Hamilton, and Madison. Let's hear what he says about the Commander-in-Chief. Hey, down there! I want the Commander-in-Chief to hear me. I want the Commander-in-Chief to hear me read not what Robert Byrd says, who's he, but read what Alexander Hamilton said. The President is to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. In most of these particulars, the power of the President will resemble equally that of the King of Great Britain and of the Governor of New York. The most material points of difference are these. First, the President will have only the occasional command of such part of the militia of the nation as by legislative provision may be called into the actual service of the Union. The King of Great Britain and the Governor of New York have at all times the entire command of all the militia within their several jurisdictions. In this article, therefore, talking about this article of the Constitution, in this article, therefore, the power of the President would be inferior to that of either the monarch or the governor. Secondly, the President is to be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. In this respect, his authority would be nominally the same with that of the King of Great Britain, but in substance much inferior to it. Get that down there at the other end of the avenue. Read it. Secondly, the President is to be Commander-in-Chief. It would amount to nothing more than the supreme command and direction of the military and naval forces as First General and Admiral of the Confederacy, while that of the British King extends to the declaring of war and to the raising and regulations of fleets and armies, all which by the Constitution under consideration would appertain to the legislature. Ha, ha, ha. That's Hamilton. I'm reading from the Federalist Papers. Perhaps I ought to send a copy down to the White House. I'll see if I can't do that. I'll send them a copy. Won't cost them anything. Just be a gift from Robert C. Byrd. Now, Mr. President, I'll have a little more to say. But suffice it to say that others of my colleagues and I have stood on this floor and we've pointed to the Constitution of the United States. We've said time and time again, as we've offered amendments, to try to uphold this Constitution of the United States. Read those amendments. They went down, I'm sorry to say. But I'm not discouraged. Let me read at this point some verses from the book of Luke in the Holy Bible, beginning with verse number 19 and continuing through verse 31. There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee, therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. Abraham saith unto him, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto them, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. There you have it. We can speak until we're blue in the face. We can speak until our tongues fall out. And they won't hear us. They won't hear us. So if there were those who were brought from the dead, would some listen? Some would, but some would not. And so I say that we have spoken here. We have spoken out of our hearts, and we could speak until our hearts fall from our bodies, but some would not hear. But let those who will not hear understand that this Constitution will endure. It will endure. It will endure because it was written, as John Marshall said, to endure for the ages. And I want to thank, in closing, I want to thank my dear friends on the Senate floor who have stood here day after day in the effort to educate our people. The Senate is a great institution, but somehow I think we're failing. We're failing to educate the people. Why? Because we don't want to spend enough time. We don't want to spend the time. How much time have we spent on this resolution? As of yesterday at 4 o'clock, a little over 25 hours on this bill. 25 hours. Why, many of the large municipalities in this country would spend a week on an application for a sewer permit. And here we spend 2 days. That's what it amounts to, 25 hours. And we're ready to quit. And we know we might as well quit. Because this cloture rule is being used against us. Why, at this time, this critical time, when we're discussing the most critical piece of legislation that we've had before the Senate this year, the most critical piece of legislation that we may have in a long time, and yet we've been stampeded, we've been rushed, and it's unfair to the people of this country that it has to be that way. Mr. President, I've received several letters from constitutional scholars from around the country, and I will ask later that these be placed in the record. But for today, I ask unanimous consent that at the conclusion of my remarks, a letter by Jane E. Stromseth, professor of law, Georgetown University Law Center, appear in the record, and that a letter from Tufts University, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, a letter signed by Michael J. Glennon, professor of international law, appear in the record at the conclusion of my remarks today. There are other letters from constitutional scholars in response to my inquiry of them as to the war powers of the United States, Congress.
Without objection, they will be admitted.
And in days to come, I will...
Would my friend from West Virginia yield for a moment?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Senator?
Yes.
Before you conclude this evening, I wanted to say thank you as a new member to this body for your incredible
Senator Debbie
commitment
Stabenow
to our Constitution
from Michigan,
and our country
Democrat.
and our people. It has been an inspirational time for me watching you on the floor, listening to your arguments, your dedication, and I have been proud to stand with you in opposing this resolution. And I wonder if I might ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, to submit into the record a New York Times op-ed that was written by the distinguished senator from West Virginia that appeared today. I think it is an excellent summary of the concerns that many of us have in rushing into this war, and I want to thank you for that today, and I think it's important that this be reflected in the record of the United States Senate as a part of this debate today.
Without objection, it will be admitted.
Senator yield. Mr. President, let me first thank the lady, the senator from Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, for her eloquence, for her steadfast determination to stand by the Constitution, as she has shown so many days, so many times in recent days. I thank her for being the senator that she is, a senator who is indebted to her people, and who stands every day somewhere in this Senate complex working for the people whom she represents. I have received great inspiration from watching her. I serve on the Budget Committee with her, and she is an outstanding, outstanding voice of the people who believes in the Constitution, who stands, takes a stand, and is so eloquent and so articulate in behalf of that Constitution. I thank her from the bottom of my heart. I thank her. And I'm about to yield the floor.
Would the senator yield for just
Yes.
a moment?
Yes.
Mr. President, I want to join my colleague from Michigan in expressing our deep thanks to the senator from West Virginia for his extraordinarily effective and
Paul
powerful
Sarbanes from
presentation
Maryland,
in the
Democrat.
course of this debate. I was also planning to put this article in, which my colleague has already done. It's a very powerful statement that appeared in this morning's New York Times, entitled, "Congress Must Resist the Rush to War." And the senator from West Virginia, as he always does, I think asks some very piercing questions and calls the Congress to its responsibilities. Let me just quote just a paragraph or two from the article. This broad resolution, speaking of the one that's now before us, underwrites, promotes, and endorses the unprecedented Bush doctrine of preventive war and preemptive strikes detailed in a recent publication, National Security Strategy of the United States, against any nation that the President and the President alone determines to be a threat. Of course, the particular resolution that's before us, as is pointed out in this article, and I quote the senator from West Virginia, "This resolution would authorize the President to use the military forces of this nation wherever, whenever, and however he determines, and for as long as he determines, if he can somehow make a connection to Iraq." And there actually were other proposals to narrow that authority, but of course none of them have carried. Further quoting, "It is a blank check for the President to take whatever action he feels is necessary and appropriate in order to defend the national security of the United States against the continuing threat posed by Iraq." I say to my colleague from West Virginia, it seems to me clear that upon approval of this resolution, as far as the Congress is concerned, war has been declared against Iraq. Would the senator agree with that observation?
I do, and I say further to my dear friend that as soon as this resolution is adopted and signed by the President of the United States, Congress is out of it. It's on the sidelines. We may wish we could say something. We may wish we could do something, but as far as the human eye can see, we're out of it until such time as Congress acts to repeal this legislation or to put a limit on it and terminate it.
Let me ask my colleague this question. Suppose some unforeseen, extraordinary development should take place after this resolution is passed and sent down and signed by the President, which transforms perhaps the weapons of mass destruction situation. The President, though, could still move ahead and go to war, could he not?
Yes.
I mean, he would have been given the authority to do that. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. We would have handed this over to the President. Lock, stock, and barrel. Here it is, Mr. President.
Well, now, when would the President have to decide whether he was going to use this authority? Let's assume as we expect it will be, is passed later in the evening, although I intend, obviously, to oppose it. But assuming it's passed and it goes down, the Congress then has authorized the President to go to war, in effect, with Iraq. I mean, any of these sort of connections. is there a limit on the time period in which the president could then use that power in order to launch war against Iraq?
There's no limit. I offered an amendment, and the distinguished senator from Maryland supported that amendment today. The distinguished senator from Minnesota supported it. Distinguished senator from Michigan, the distinguished senator from New York, distinguished senator from Delaware supported it. But we only got 31 votes. That amendment was defeated.
Well, that only underscores what the distinguished senator says in this op-ed piece that appeared in this morning's New York Times, and I quote it: "We may not always be able to avoid war, particularly if it is thrust upon us, but Congress must not attempt to give away the authority to determine when war is to be declared. We must not allow any president to unleash the dogs of war at his own discretion and for an unlimited period of time. Yet that is what we are being asked to do."
Yes.
In the resolution that's before us.
Yes, that's it.
Well, this, of course, is a decision with far sweeping consequences, obviously. Not only, I mean, immediately as it deals with Iraq and all of its implications, but the precedent that's being established here in terms of the future, it seems to me, constitutes a major erosion of the role of the Congress with respect to the nation going to war.
It does. And it's easy enough, I suppose, to pass this resolution, but should we try to negate it? Should we try to repeal it? Should we try to change the law? A president can veto any change that Congress might come along later, any change that it might enact in order to overturn this law, which it is now about to adopt.
Well, I'm glad the distinguished senator made that point, because it was the next item I wanted to go to. I mean, people could say, well, if the circumstances change that Congress wants to pull it back, why don't they come in, pass a law, and pull it back? But the fact is that a president who wanted to keep that authority and may well wanted to use it, as long as he could keep the support of 1/3, not of each house of the Congress, but only 1/3 of one house, either 1/3 of the senators plus one, or a third of the members of the House of Representatives, he could negate congressional action that tried to pull back this war-making authority. Could he not?
The distinguished senior senator from Maryland is absolutely correct. It only takes a majority of both houses to pass this resolution, but it would take 2/3 in the future if the president should attempt to veto a subsequent piece of legislation by this Congress to abort what we're doing here today, to repeal it, to amend it. 1/3 plus one in either body could uphold the president's veto, and that legislation would not become law.
Well, I think that's a point that we haven't really touched on much, I don't think, in this debate, but I think it's an extremely important point, because what's happened is you pass this resolution, you make a major grant of war-making authority to the president. But then if subsequently you decide that it ought to be pulled back or ought not to be exercised by the president, it's extraordinarily difficult to do that. So not only have you given the president this broad power to begin with, but the way the system is constructed, he can hold on to that power even if a majority of both houses of the Congress, which gave the power, want to take it back. Is that not correct?
It couldn't be more correct. It's absolutely correct.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth engaging in this discussion just to underscore the sweep of authority that's being provided here. And again, I want to thank my colleague for his leadership on this issue, and especially to commend him for what I thought was a very thoughtful and powerful article. And I really would encourage people all across the country to read this article. I think it is a very succinct, analytical, and perceptive statement of the issues that are at stake here.
Mr. President, I thank the distinguished senator from Maryland, who is a great senator. I'm proud of the years that I served with him. We've gone through some interesting times here in the Senate together. We've stood beside one another, shoulder to shoulder, in fighting for this Constitution on several occasions. And the line item veto, constitutional amendment to balance the budget, and on other occasions. And I thank the people of Maryland for sending him and for keeping him here. I'd say that the Republic will long live as long as the people of America send senators here like Paul Sarbanes. I thank the people of Maryland, and I thank God for him. Now, Mr. President, I'm about to yield the floor. I've been asked by the distinguished senator from New York to yield to her. How much time do I have left?
42 minutes.
42 minutes. Mr. President, I don't intend to hold the floor much longer. How much time would the senator from New York, Mrs. Clinton, wish me to yield to her?
20 minutes.
20 minutes, Mr. President. I yield 20 minutes to the senator, and I reserve the balance of my time then.
Senator from New York is recognized.
The senator from New York just yield for a second to me.
Before she
Certainly.
votes yes.
I would just, thank you. I would point out that the distinguished chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee has not had an opportunity to speak, and in all due respect, I'd like to give the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee a respect that he deserves.
I'm delighted to wait in line, and I'll speak after the senator from New York.
How much time do I have remaining?
41 minutes.
I yield 20 minutes to the senator from New York, Mrs. Clinton, and I yield the remaining 21 minutes. I yield 20 minutes, leaving myself 1 minute. 20 minutes to the senator from Delaware, Mr. Biden, and I thank the distinguished senator from Arizona for reminding me that the senator from Delaware had been waiting very patiently. I thank also.
Did you understand?
Mr. President, I thank the senator from West Virginia for his courtesy, but far beyond that, I thank him for his leadership and his eloquence and his passion and commitment to this body and to our Constitution. I join with the remarks by both the senators from Michigan and Maryland in expressing our appreciation for the way in which he has waged this battle on behalf of his convictions. It is a lesson to us all. Because today, Mr. President, we are asked whether to give the President of the United States authority to use force in Iraq should diplomatic efforts fail to dismantle Saddam Hussein's chemical and biological weapons and his nuclear program. I am honored to represent nearly 19 million New Yorkers, a thoughtful democracy of voices and opinions who make themselves heard on the great issues of our day, especially this one. Many have contacted my office about this resolution, both in support of and in opposition to it. And I am grateful to all who have expressed an opinion. I also greatly respect the differing opinions within this body. The debate they engender will aid our search for a wise, effective policy. Therefore, on no account should dissent be discouraged or disparaged. It is central to our freedom and to our progress, for on more than one occasion, history has proven our great dissenters to be right. Now, I believe the facts that have brought us to this fateful vote are not in doubt. Saddam Hussein is a tyrant who has tortured and killed his own people, even his own family members, to maintain his iron grip on power. He used chemical weapons on Iraqi Kurds and on Iranians, killing over 20,000 people. Unfortunately, during the 1980s, while he engaged in such horrific activity, he enjoyed the support of the American government because he had oil and was seen as a counterweight to the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. In 1991, Saddam Hussein invaded and occupied Kuwait, losing the support of the United States. The first President Bush assembled a global coalition, including many Arab states, and threw Saddam out after 43 days of bombing and 100 hours of ground operations. The United States-led coalition then withdrew, leaving the Kurds and the Shiites who had risen against Saddam Hussein at our urging to Saddam's revenge. As a condition for ending the conflict, the United Nations imposed a number of requirements on Iraq, among them disarmament of all weapons of mass destruction, stocks used to make such weapons, and laboratories necessary to do the work. Saddam Hussein agreed, and an inspection system was set up to ensure compliance. And though he repeatedly lied, delayed, and obstructed the inspection's work, the inspectors found and destroyed far more weapons of mass destruction capability than were destroyed in the Gulf War, including thousands of chemical weapons, large volumes of chemical and biological stocks, a number of missiles and warheads, a major lab equipped to produce anthrax and other bioweapons, as well as substantial nuclear facilities. In 1998, Saddam Hussein pressured the United Nations to lift the sanctions by threatening to stop all cooperation with the inspectors. In an attempt to resolve the situation, the UN, unwisely in my view, agreed to put limits on inspections of designated sovereign sites, including the so-called presidential palaces, which in reality were huge compounds well suited to hold weapons labs, stocks, and records which Saddam Hussein was required by UN resolution to turn over. When Saddam blocked the inspection process, the inspectors left. As a result, President Clinton, with the British and others, ordered an intensive 4-day air assault, Operation Desert Fox, on known and suspected weapons of mass destruction sites and other military targets. In 1998, the United States also changed its underlying policy toward Iraq from containment to regime change and began to examine options to effect such a change, including support for Iraqi opposition leaders within the country and abroad. In the 4 years since the inspectors left, intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program. He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists, including al-Qaeda members, though there is apparently no evidence of his involvement in the terrible events of September the 11th, 2001. It is clear, however, that if left unchecked, Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons. Should he succeed in that endeavor, he could alter the political and security landscape of the Middle East, which, as we know all too well, affects American security. Now, this much is undisputed. The open questions are, what should we do about it? How, when, and with whom? Now, some people favor attacking Saddam Hussein now, with any allies we can muster, in the belief that one more round of weapons inspections would not produce the required disarmament, and that deposing Saddam would be a positive good for the Iraqi people, and would create the possibility of a secular democratic state in the Middle East, one which could perhaps move the entire region toward democratic reform. Now, this view has appeal to some because it would assure disarmament, because it would right old wrongs after our abandonment of the Shiites and Kurds in 1991, and our support for Saddam Hussein in the 1980s when he was using chemical weapons and terrorizing his people, and because it could give the Iraqi people a chance to build a future in freedom. However, this course is fraught with danger. We and our NATO allies did not depose Mr. Milosevic, who was responsible for more than 250,000 people being killed in the 1990s. Instead, by stopping his aggression in Bosnia and Kosovo and keeping on the tough sanctions, we created the conditions in which his own people threw him out and led to his being in the dock, being tried for war crimes as we speak. If we were to attack Iraq now, alone or with few allies, it would set a precedent that could come back to haunt us. In recent days, Russia has talked of an invasion of Georgia to attack Chechen rebels. India has mentioned the possibility of a preemptive strike on Pakistan. And what if China were to perceive a threat from Taiwan? So, Mr. President, for all its appeal, a unilateral attack, while it cannot be ruled out, on the present facts is not a good option. Now, others argue that we should work through the United Nations and should only resort to force if and when the United Nations Security Council approves it. Now, this too has great appeal for different reasons. The UN deserves our support. Whenever possible, we should work through it and strengthen it, for it enables the world to share the risks and burdens of global security, and when it acts, it confers a legitimacy that increases the likelihood of long-term success. The UN can help lead the world into a new era of global cooperation, and the United States should support that goal. But there are problems with this approach as well. The United Nations is an organization that is still growing and maturing. It often lacks the cohesion to enforce its own mandates. And when Security Council members use the veto on occasion for reasons of narrow-minded interests, it cannot act. In Kosovo, the Russians did not approve NATO military action because of political, ethnic, and religious ties to the Serbs. The United States, therefore, could not obtain a Security Council resolution in favor of the action necessary to stop the dislocation and ethnic cleansing of more than 1 million of Kosovar Albanians. However, most of the world was with us because there was a genuine emergency with thousands dead and 1 million driven from their homes. And as soon as the American-led conflict was over, Russia joined the peacekeeping effort that is still underway. In the case of Iraq, recent comments indicate that 1 or 2 Security Council members might never approve force against Saddam Hussein until he has actually used chemical, biological, or, God forbid, nuclear weapons. So, Mr. President, the question is, how do we do our best to both defuse the real threat that Saddam Hussein poses to his people, to the region, including Israel, to the United States, to the world, and at the same time work to maximize international support and strengthen the United Nations? While there is no perfect approach to this thorny dilemma, and while people of good faith and high intelligence can reach diametrically opposing conclusions, I believe the best course is to go to the UN for a strong resolution that scraps the 1998 restrictions on inspections and calls for complete, unlimited inspections with cooperation expected and demanded from Iraq. I know that the administration wants more, including an explicit authorization to use force, but we may not be able to secure that now, perhaps even later. But if we get a clear requirement for unfettered inspections, I believe the authority to use force to enforce that mandate is inherent in the original 1991 UN resolutions, as President Clinton recognized when he launched Operation Desert Fox in 1998. If we get the resolution that President Bush seeks, and if Saddam complies, disarmament can proceed and the threat can be eliminated. Regime change will, of course, take longer, but we must still work for it, nurturing all reasonable forces of opposition. If we get the resolution and Saddam does not comply, then we can attack him with far more support and legitimacy than we would have otherwise. If we try and fail to get a resolution that simply but forcefully calls for Saddam's compliance with unlimited inspections, those who oppose even that will be in an indefensible position. And we will still have more support and legitimacy than if we insist now on a resolution that includes authorizing military action and other requirements, giving some nations superficially legitimate reasons to oppose any Security Council action. They will say we never wanted a resolution at all, and that we only support the United Nations when it does exactly what we want. I believe international support and legitimacy are crucial. After shots are fired and bombs are dropped, not all consequences are predictable. While the military outcome is not in doubt, should we put troops on the ground, there is still the matter of Saddam Hussein's biological and chemical weapons. Today, he has maximum incentive not to use them or give them away. If he did either, the world would demand his immediate removal. Once the battle is joined, however, with the outcome certain, he will have maximum incentive to use weapons of mass destruction and to give what he can't use to terrorists who can torment us with them long after he is gone. We cannot be paralyzed by this possibility, but we would be foolish to ignore it. And according to recent reports, the CIA agrees with this analysis. A world united in sharing the risk at least would make this occurrence less likely and more bearable, and would be far more likely to share with us the considerable burden of rebuilding a secure and peaceful post-Saddam Iraq. President Bush's speech in Cincinnati and the changes in policy that have come forth from the administration since they first began broaching this issue some weeks ago have made my vote easier. Even though the resolution before the Senate is not as strong as I would like in requiring the diplomatic route first and placing highest priority on a simple, clear requirement for unlimited inspections, I will take the President at his word that he will try hard to pass a UN resolution and will seek to avoid war if at all possible. Because bipartisan support for this resolution makes success in the United Nations more likely and therefore war less likely, and because a good faith effort by the United States, even if it fails, will bring more allies and legitimacy to our cause, I have concluded, after careful and serious consideration, that a vote for the resolution best serves the security of our nation. If we were to defeat this resolution or pass it with only a few Democrats, I am concerned that those who want to pretend this problem will go away with delay will oppose any UN resolution calling for unrestricted inspections. This is a very difficult vote. This is probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Any vote that might lead to war should be hard. But I cast it with conviction. And perhaps my decision is influenced by my 8 years of experience on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, in the White House, watching my husband deal with serious challenges to our nation. I want this president or any future president to be in the strongest possible position to lead our country in the United Nations or in war. Secondly, I want to ensure that Saddam Hussein makes no mistake about our national unity and for our support for the President's efforts to wage America's war against terrorists and weapons of mass destruction. And thirdly, I want the men and women in our armed forces to know that if they should be called upon to act against Iraq, our country will stand resolutely behind them. My vote is not, however, a vote for any new doctrine of preemption or for unilateralism or for the arrogance of American power or purpose, all of which carry grave dangers for our nation, for the rule of international law, and for the peace and security of people throughout the world. Over 11 years have passed since the UN called on Saddam Hussein to rid himself of weapons of mass destruction as a condition of returning to the world community. Time and time again, he has frustrated and denied these conditions. This matter cannot be left hanging forever with consequences we would all live to regret. War can yet be avoided, but our responsibility to global security and to the integrity of United Nations resolutions protecting it cannot. I urge the President to spare no effort to secure a clear, unambiguous demand by the United Nations for unlimited inspections. And finally, on another personal note, I come to this decision from the perspective of a senator from New York who has seen all too closely the consequences of last year's terrible attacks on our nation. In balancing the risks of action versus inaction, I think New Yorkers who have gone through the fires of hell may be more attuned to the risk of not acting. I know that I am. So it is with conviction that I support this resolution as being in the best interests of our nation. A vote for it is not a vote to rush to war. It is a vote that puts awesome responsibility in the hands of our President. And we say to him, use these powers wisely and as a last resort. And it is a vote that says clearly to Saddam Hussein, this is your last chance. Disarm or be disarmed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Delaware is recognized.
I seek the floor in my own right. I understand that the distinguished senator from West Virginia offered me 20 minutes of his time, but I seek the floor in my own right. And as I understand, under the present state of affairs, I have up to 1 hour.
The senator has the balance of his 1 hour, 47 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. President, I will vote for the Lieberman-Warner amendment to authorize the use of military force against Iraq. And unlike my colleague from West Virginia and Maryland, I do not believe this is a rush to war. I believe it's a march to peace and security. I believe that failure to overwhelmingly support this resolution is likely to enhance the prospects that war will occur. And in line with what the distinguished lady from New York just said, I believe that passage of this with strong support is very likely to enhance the prospects that the Secretary of State will get a very strong resolution out of the Security Council. I'll vote for this because we should support compelling Iraq to make good on its obligations to the United Nations. Because while Iraq's illegal weapons of mass destruction program does not pose an imminent threat to our national security, in my view, they will if left unfettered. And because a strong vote in Congress, as I said, increases the prospect for a tough new UN resolution on weapons of mass destruction, it is likely to get weapons inspectors in, which in turn decreases the prospects of war, in my view. I might also note, and I will get into this in a moment, that my friend from Maryland and from West Virginia talked about the president being unfettered. I know of no other resolution authorizing the President to use war in this circumstance that also invokes and requires adherence to the War Powers Act, in addition to the war clause and all the ramifications that flow from that. I'm among those who had serious reservations about and flat-out straight opposition to the first draft proposed by the White House on September 19th. It was much, much too broad. The draft raised more questions than it answered. It was not clear whether the authorization requested by the President to use force was limited to Iraq or applicable to the region as a whole. It was not clear whether the objective was to compel Iraq to destroy its weapons of mass destruction programs, to liberate Kuwaiti prisoners, or to end Saddam Hussein's regime. It was not clear whether the rationale for action was to enforce the UN Security Council resolutions that Saddam has flouted for the last decade, or to implement a new doctrine of preemption. And it was not clear whether the administration considered working through the UN and working with allies important or irrelevant. The second draft, negotiated with congressional leadership, and I would say, I believe in part as a consequence of the efforts of my good friend Senator Lugar and I, and roughly 23 or 24 Republicans, got the attention of the administration. They were simultaneously negotiating with the senator from Indiana and me, as well as the leader in the House. The leader in the House reached an agreement first. I thought that was unfortunate because I believe we could have had a better resolution had that not occurred. But nonetheless, the second draft negotiated addressed some of these questions but left others unanswered. Along with many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, notably Senator Lugar, I continue to seek greater clarity about the focus of the proposed resolution. President Bush brought the resolution into sharper focus this week in his speech to the nation. He said that, quote, war is neither imminent nor inevitable. He also said that his objective was to disarm Iraq, that his rationale to enforce the United Nations resolution was not based upon preemption, and that he desired to lead the world, and if war was necessary, it would be with allies at our side. Mr. President, the resolution now before the Congress similarly is clearer and more focused than previous drafts. It is not perfect, but it acknowledges the core concerns that Senator Lugar and I and others raised, and which have been raised by such senators as Hagel and Specter and many others. Considered in the context of the President's speech this week and his address last month to the United Nations General Assembly, this resolution, though still imperfect, deserves our support, and let me explain why. First, the objective is more clearly and carefully stated. The objective is to compel Iraq to destroy its illegal weapons of mass destruction and its programs to develop and produce missiles and more of those weapons. Saddam is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons and is seeking, with his $2 billion a year illegally skimmed from the UN Fund for Food, his oil for food program, for peace program, that he is seeking nuclear weapons. And for years now, he has prevented the United Nations inspectors from uncovering those weapons and verifying Iraq's disarmament. And he is in violation of the terms he agreed to, allowing him to stay in power. What essentially happened was he sued for peace. What essentially happened was the UN resolutions were a reflection of what ordinarily, if there were no UN, would be in fact in the form of a peace agreement. This resolution authorizes the President to use force to, quote, defend the national security of the United States against the continuing threat posed by Iraq and enforce all relevant UN Security Council resolutions, end of quote. In my view, and as has been stated by the President and Secretary of State, the threat to the United States is Iraq's weapon of mass destruction programs. The relevant UN resolutions are those related to Iraqi's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. And the fact that we use the conjunctive clause, the word and not the word or, means that the authorization we are granting to the President is tied to defending the national security of the United States in the context of enforcing the relevant UN resolutions relating to weapons of mass destruction. This is not a blank check for the use of force against Iraq for any reason. It is an authorization for the use of force, if necessary, to compel Iraq to disarm, as it promised after the Gulf War. Some in the administration have argued that our stated objective should be the end of Saddam Hussein's regime. Regime change is the ultimate goal of American policy, as embodied in the sense of the Congress provision on the Iraq Liberation Act in '98. Indeed, an effective effort to disarm Iraq could well result in regime change. After all, such an effort would force Saddam to make a hard choice, either give up his weapons or give up power, and he's made the wrong choices many times before. In his own words, the President said, taking these steps would also change the nature of the Iraqi regime itself. America hopes the regime will make that choice. But this resolution does not make Saddam's removal its explicit goal. To have done so, in my view, would run the risk of alienating other countries who do not share that goal and whose support we need to disarm Iraq and possibly to rebuild it. And it would significantly weaken our hand at the United Nations. Not at this moment. I'll be happy to yield when I finish. Nor does this resolution give the President the authorization to go to war over Bahraini prisoners, reparations owed to Kuwait, foreign MIAs, the return of Kuwaiti national advisors, or Saddam's ties to terrorism and human rights abuses. These are serious problems. The United Nations must continue to insist that they be resolved, including maintaining embargoes and tightening and strengthening those sanctions against Iraq. But I doubt seriously that the American people will support going to war to rectify any of them, nor will our allies. The Secretary of State, in testimony before the Committee on Foreign Relations, made it clear that our core objective is disarmament. And I quote the Secretary of State, "I think it is unlikely the President would use force if Iraq complied with weapons of mass destruction conditions. We all know that that is our major problem. The President is focused on, and the danger to us and to the world are weapons of mass destruction," end of quote. And this week, and by the way, I'd note parenthetically, even if my reading is incorrect, and he would be able to go to liberate Bahraini prisoners, does anybody in this body think the President of the United States would risk American forces and, in a very crass sense, his presidency, by going in with American forces unilaterally to make sure that Bahraini prisoners were, in fact, released? I think that is fiction. This week, the President stated the objective clearly and concisely. He said, and I quote, "Saddam Hussein must disarm himself, or for the sake of peace, we will lead a coalition to disarm him." Mr. President, the President is right to focus on disarming Iraq and not on regime change. The second rationale is more tightly focused. It is to enforce the UN Security Council resolution on weapons of mass destruction that Saddam has defied for more than a decade. This is a man who waged a war of aggression, lost the war, and sued for peace. The terms of surrender dictated by the United Nations require him to declare and destroy his weapons of mass destruction programs. He has not done so. This resolution sets out in detail Saddam's decade of defying the Security Council's resolutions on disarmament. It states that Iraq, quote, "remains in material and unacceptable breach of its international obligations," end of quote, through its weapons of mass destruction programs. And it authorizes the President to enforce, quote, "all relevant UN Security Council resolutions regarding Iraq," end of quote, "with force if necessary." As the President said this week, America is challenging all nations to take the resolutions on the United Nations Security Council of the United Nations Security Council seriously. That's what this is about. And yet some administrative supporters have argued that using force against Iraq is justified on the basis of a new doctrine of preemption, a doctrine that could represent the most far-reaching change in our foreign policy since the end of the Cold War. In fact, the concept of preemption has long been part of our foreign policy toolkit. It's a doctrine well established under international law. What we're talking about here in this new policy is a policy of prevention, striking first at someone who may someday pose a threat to us, even if that threat is not imminent today. This policy merits a serious national debate, but not adoption by this body, nor is it contained in this resolution. The speed and stealth with which an outlaw state or terrorist could use weapons of mass destruction and the catastrophic damage they can inflict require us to consider new ways of acting, not reacting. But that is not what this is about. It would be dangerous to rush to embrace, as a new principle of American foreign policy, a rule that gives every nation the right to act preventively. The former Secretary of State, Secretary Henry Kissinger, made this point powerfully in his testimony before my committee 2 weeks ago, and I quote him: "As the most powerful nation in the world, the United States has a special unilateral capacity and indeed obligation to lead in implementing its convictions, but it also has a special obligation to justify its actions by principles that transcend the assertions of preponderance of power. It cannot be in either the American national interest or the world's interest to develop principles that grant every nation an unfettered right of preemption against its own definition of threats to its security." End of quote. Dr. Kissinger is right. What message would be declaring a policy of prevention send to the Indians and Pakistanis, the Chinese and the Taiwanese, the Israelis and the Arabs, the Russians and Chechens? This resolution does not send that message because it does not endorse the prevention doctrine. It does not need to, because the President, as he has argued, this is about compelling Saddam Hussein to make good on his requirement and obligation to disarm. Third, this resolution makes clear the President's determination to build international support for our Iraq policy. Our allies throughout the world and in the region have important contributions to make in the effort to disarm Iraq and to rebuild Iraq if we go to war. And we depend upon their continued cooperation in the unfinished war against terrorism. The United States has a singular capacity to act alone, if necessary. We must, and this resolution does, preserve our right to do so. But acting alone in Iraq would cost us significantly more in lost lives, in dollars spent, and influence dissipated around the world. Acting alone must be a last resort, not a defiant retort to those not yet convinced of our policy. This resolution emphasizes the importance of international support, manifested through the United Nations Security Council. It states, "The Congress of the United States supports the efforts by the President to, 1, strictly enforce through the United Nations Security Council all relevant Security Council resolutions applicable to Iraq, and encourages him in those efforts, and 2, to obtain prompt and decisive action by the Security Council to ensure that Iraq abandons its strategy of delay, evasion, and noncompliance." End of quote. Similarly, the President, in going to the United Nations over the strong objection of half his administration, made clear his desire to work with others, not around them. In his speech this week, he talked about his determination, quote, "to lead the world," end of quote, in confronting the Iraqi problem. He stated that if we act militarily, we will act with allies at our side, end of quote. I'm convinced that he will follow through on this commitment. In short, the combination of this resolution and the President's own words in recent speeches, both publicly and privately, give me confidence that most of our core concerns have been addressed. I also have confidence from how far this administration has come on Iraq over the past year. Many predicted in this chamber and many who oppose this resolution predicted that the administration would use the terrible events of September 11th as an excuse to strike back at Iraq. This despite any credible evidence that Iraq was involved in the terrorist attacks on America. Both the New York Times and the Washington Post have reported that in the days following 9/11, the most senior Pentagon official urged the president to consider setting his sights on Iraq, not Afghanistan. And I can say from personal conversations, I know that to be true. Matter of fact, I gathered my Foreign Relations Committee staff not long after 9/11, when talk of going to Afghanistan was in this chamber and at the administration. And I suggested, based on conversations I had with some, that be careful, prepare. We're not going to Iraq, we're not going to Afghanistan, we're going to Iraq. Because I know there was a proposal that was being promoted to the president that he should use this as an excuse to go to Iraq. Secretary Rumsfeld is reported to have argued that there would be a big buildup of forces with not that many good targets in Afghanistan. At some point, the United States would have to deal with Iraq, and is this not the opportunity he apparently suggested? Not to me, that's as reported. Many predicted the administration would ignore the United Nations and the need to build international support for its Iraqi policy. That's not surprising, because senior administrations officials said as much. During the spring and early summer, literally dozens of articles flatly stated that the president planned a unilateral attack against Iraq. As late as August 29th of this year, the New York Times reported, and I quote, "Officials in Washington and Crawford, Texas, are engaged in an intense debate over whether they should seek to involve the United Nations one last time. As one top advisor described the argument, Mr. Bush must decide whether to go it alone or go to the United Nations," end of quote. He went to the United Nations. Many predicted the administration would refuse to give the weapons inspector one last chance to disarm. That's not surprising. That prediction would have been made, because administrative officials consistently disparaged inspections. Richard Pearl, a senior advisor to the Pentagon, said that, quote, "Inspectors are not going to find anything. They will flounder if they are permitted to return," end of quote. Vice President Cheney, as late as August 26th of this year, took this line, quote, "A person would be right to question any suggestion that we should just get inspectors back into Iraq and that our worries would be over. A return of inspectors would provide no insurance whatsoever of Sudan's compliance with UN resolution." I don't know how many Sunday shows I did from June through now, where every interviewer would say, "But Senator, you're wrong. The president is going to act alone." They didn't read me quote after quote from high officials. Thank God for Colin Powell. Thank God for Colin Powell. Because that was the other half being argued by the administration quietly. Say, Mr. President, do not listen to those voices who counsel no inspectors and do not go back to the UN. Many predicted that the administration would not seek authorization from Congress for the use of force, and again, that's not surprising. As late as August 29th of this year, the White House Counsel told the president that he had all the authority he needs to wage war, and there was a big deal about leaking a memorandum from the White House Counsel to the world that Congress need not be involved, Mr. President. I had two private meetings with the president myself, where I made clear that I thought that was dead wrong, and he would be, to use the slang on the east side of my city, in a world of hurt if he attempted to do that. The president said to me personally he was going to come to Congress if he sought authority. What did he do? He came to Congress. But it's not strange that my colleagues up here would believe he would not do that. The White House press secretary actually reiterated that conclusion in the White House Counsel and White House briefings. Each prediction by those who thought the president would make, in my view, the wrong choice, seemed very well founded, because it was based on the beliefs and statements of very senior administration officials, including the Vice President of the United States. And we all know the lore around here is that the Vice President of the United States is the most powerful man in the administration. Some even suggest it goes beyond that. But guess what? Each prediction proved to be wrong, as some of us, quite frankly, predicted all along. My colleague from New York may remember my getting a little bit of a sarcastic response in the Democratic caucuses when I suggested there was no possibility there would be a war before November. There was no possibility of an October surprise. There was no possibility that he would go and seek power to go to war if need be, absent congressional authorization. There was no possibility he'd fail to go to the United Nations. It's not just because that's the only thing I believe a rational president could do, but because he told us, told me, and I suspect many others, that that's what he would do for decades, for decades. Mr. President, President Bush did not lash out precipitously at Iraq after 9/11. He did not snub the UN or our allies. He did not dismiss new inspection regimes. He did not ignore Congress. At each pivotal moment, he has chosen a course of moderation and deliberation, and I believe he will continue to do so. At least that is my fervent hope. I wish he would turn down the rhetorical excess in some cases, because I think it undercuts the decision he ends up making. But in each case, in my view, he has made the right, rational, and calm, deliberate decision. As I noted a few moments ago, the President said this week that the use of force in Iraq is neither imminent nor inevitable, and that it makes sense because while the threat from Iraq is real and growing, its immense, its imminence and inevitability in terms of American security have been exaggerated. For 2 decades, Saddam has relentlessly pursued weapons of mass destruction. There is a broad agreement that he retains chemical and biological weapons, the means to manufacture those weapons, and modified Scud missiles, and that he is actively seeking a nuclear capability. It remains less clear how effective his delivery vehicles are, whether they be the Al-Hussein missile with a 650-kilometer range, short-range missiles, or untested and unmanned aerial vehicles for the dispersion of chemical and biological weapons. Shifting weather conditions, the likely incineration of much of the chemical or biological agent in a warhead explosion, and the potential blowback on Iraqi forces all complicate the Iraqi use of these weapons. But we are right to be concerned that given time and a free hand, Saddam would improve this technology. Other countries have or seek weapons of mass destruction. Saddam has actually used them against his neighbors, against his own people. He has a lengthy track record of aggression, first in Iran, then Kuwait. He has brutally repressed Iraqi civilians, first the Kurds in the north, then the Shias in the south, then the Kurds again. And the combination of Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction is dangerous, destabilizing, and deadly. Ultimately, either those weapons must be dislodged from Iraq or Saddam must be dislodged from power. But exactly what threat does the combination of Saddam and weapons of mass destruction pose to the United States? How urgent is the problem? Some argue the danger is threefold. First, Iraq could use these weapons against us. 2, it could use them to blackmail us. Or 3, it could become a surreptitious supplier to terrorist groups. Other question these scenarios. For example, Brent Scowcroft, President George Herbert Walker Bush's National Security Advisor, now chairman of President Bush's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, recently wrote, and I quote, "Threatening to use these weapons for blackmail, much less their actual use, would open Saddam and his entire regime to a devastating response by the U.S. While Saddam is thoroughly evil, he is above all a power-hungry survivor." Similarly, Scowcroft went on to write, "There is scant evidence to tie Saddam to terrorist organizations, and even less to September 11th attacks. Indeed, Saddam's goals have little in common with the terrorists who threaten us. and he is unlikely to risk his investment in weapons of mass destruction, much less his country, by handing such weapons to terrorists who would use them for their own purposes and leave Baghdad as a return address. Daniel Benjamin, a former director of the Counterterrorism and National Security Council staff and co-author of the remarkable new book, The Age of Sacred Terror, wrote recently in the New York Times the following: Iraq and al-Qaeda are not obvious allies. In fact, they are natural enemies. To contemporary jihadists, Saddam Hussein is another in the line of dangerous secularists, an enemy of the faith. Saddam Hussein has a long record that al-Qaeda and like-minded Islamicists Saddam Hussein has long recognized that al-Qaeda and like-minded Islamicists represent a threat to his regime. Consequently, terrorism in the past by always traditional ways. It sought to eliminate Iraqi opponents abroad, or when confronting it. But Mr. Hussein has remained true to the unwritten rules of state sponsorship of terrorism. Never get involved by a group that cannot be controlled, and never give a weapon of mass destruction to terrorists who might use them against you. And I would reiterate here, just as Mark Twain said, the reports of my death are much exaggerated. The reports of al-Qaeda in Iraq are much, 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 much exaggerated. Our own intelligence, in testimony before the Foreign Relations and Armed Services and Intelligence Committee that has been declassified, concluded that the probability of Iraq initiating an attack against the United States with weapons of mass destruction is, and I quote, low, L-O-W, low. They also concluded that, quote, Baghdad for now appears to be drawing a line short of conducting terrorist attacks with chemical or biological weapons against the United States, end of quote. I believe it's unlikely Saddam Hussein will use weapons of mass destruction against us unless he's attacked. To do so would invite immediate annihilation, and I'm skeptical that he would become a supplier to terrorist groups. He would risk being caught in the act or having those weapons turned against him by groups who disdain Saddam as much as they despise us. And he would be giving away what is to him the ultimate source and symbol of his power, the only thing that makes him unique among the thugs in the region. Of course, Saddam has miscalculated before, and we're right to be concerned about the possibilities, however remote, that he will do it again. But we are wrong on this floor to exaggerate and suggest this is the reason and justification for going against Saddam. What I do believe that Saddam's primary goal is to dominate his region. His history, his actions, and his statements make that clear. Weapons of mass destruction are a means to that end for him, a terrible tool of intimidation that he could use to bully his people and his neighbors. During the Gulf War, the knowledge that Saddam Hussein had chemical and biological weapons did not deter us from expelling his forces from Kuwait. We gave him clear warning that using these weapons against our troops would invite a devastating response. And let me remind everybody, he did not use them. But a nuclear weapon could well change Saddam's calculus. It could give Saddam an inflated sense of his invincibility. It could lead him to conclude erroneously that he finally had the great equalizer against American power, and that he could fuel a new spasm of aggression against his neighbors or the Kurds in the mistaken belief that we would be deterred for fear that if we put anyone on the ground, they would be annihilated with his theater or tactical nuclear weapons. We cannot let Saddam Hussein get his hands on nuclear weapons. In particular, we must deny Iraq the necessary fissile material, highly enriched uranium or weapons-grade plutonium needed for a nuclear weapon. According to an unclassified letter released by the Director of Central Intelligence this week, quote, Iraq is unlikely to produce indigenously enough weapons-grade material for a deliverable nuclear weapon until the last half of this decade, end of quote. Therefore, if Iraq wants a nuclear capability sooner, it will need to turn to foreign sources for fissile material, which could shorten the timetable for Iraqi nuclear weapon to about a year. This reality underscores the importance of U.S. and international efforts, not only to disarm Iraq, but also to reduce and better secure fissile materials in the former Soviet Union, the most logical source of black market purchases or theft. Concerning Iraq, our first step should be the one the President apparently has chosen, to get the weapons inspectors back into Iraq. There is disagreement about the value of weapons inspectors. Skeptics contend that inspectors can never guarantee the complete disarmament of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, particularly our Vice President, especially given the prevalence of dual-use materials and mobile facilities for the production of chemical and biological weapons. Proponents believe that inspectors heighten the barrier to development and production of WMD and will buy time until the regime change in Iraq occurs. They point to the success of UNSCOM and IAEA. For example, the British white paper on Iraq's WMD issued last month, which was quoted by those who wish to move against Iraq, says, and I quote, "Despite the conduct of the Iraqi authorities toward them, both UNSCOM and IAEA action teams have valuable records of achievement in discovering and exposing Iraqi's biological weapons programs and in destroying very large quantities of chemical weapon stocks and missiles, as well as the infrastructure for Iraqi's nuclear weapons program," end of quote. It has been argued that UNSCOM's most notable achievements were the result of fortuitous defections. In fact, much of UNSCOM's success was due to diligent detective work in Iraq. But let's assume that defections and not detection are the key to success. Isn't the best way to encourage defections? Isn't the best way to get first-hand information about Iraqi weapons programs to have inspectors back on the ground talking to the key people? I agree with President Bush that given a new mandate and the authority to go any place, any time, with no advance warning, you inspectors can work. They can succeed in discovering and destroying much of Saddam's chemical and biological arsenals and his missile program. They can delay and derail his efforts to acquire nuclear weapons. And at the very least, they will give us a clearer picture of what Saddam has. Force him to focus on hiding his weapons and not building more, and buy us time to build a strong international coalition to act if he refuses to disarm. Mr. President, there is no question that with regard to Iraq, we have a real and growing problem. But I also believe that we have time to deal with that problem in a way that isolates Saddam and does not isolate the United States of America. Isolates Saddam, not the United States of America. And that makes the use of force the final option, not the first one. That produces the desired results, not unintended consequences. That is the course President Bush has chosen, in my view. Now it is incumbent upon the United Nations and the United States Congress to help him stay the course. The United Nations Security Council must deliver a tough new resolution that gives the weapons inspectors the authority they need to get the job done. As the President put it, the inspectors, quote, "must have access to any site at any time, without preconditions, without delay, and without exceptions." Mr. President, the resolution should set clear deadlines for compliance, and it should make clear the consequences if Saddam Hussein fails to disarm, including authorizing willing UN members to use force to compel compliance. I also agree with the President that the key component of any inspection regimes must be the UN's ability to interview those with knowledge of Iraq's weapons programs in a climate free of fear and intimidation, including being able to take them outside of Iraq. Offering sanctuary to those who tell the truth would also deprive Saddam Hussein of their expertise. To that end, this week, Senator Specter and I introduced legislation called the Iraqi Scientist Liberation Act that would admit to our country those Iraqi scientists, up to 500, those Iraqi scientists, engineers, and technicians, and their families who give reliable information on Saddam's programs to us, to the United Nations, or to the Atomic Energy Agency. It is also critical that Congress send the right message to the United Nations Security Councils. Its members must not doubt our determination to deal with the problems posed by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, including our willingness to use force if necessary. The stronger the vote in favor of this resolution, the stronger the likelihood, in my view, that the Security Council will approve a tough UN resolution. That's because the UN will conclude, if we don't act, America will, so we better. And a tougher UN resolution, the less likely it is that we'll have to use force in Iraq. That's because such a resolution would finally force Saddam to face the choice between inspectors and invaders, between giving up his weapons and giving up power. And there's at least a chance that he might make the right choice. But there's also a chance that Saddam will once again miscalculate, that he will misjudge our resolve, and in that event, we must be prepared to use force with others if we can, and alone if we must. And the American people must be prepared. They must be prepared for the possible consequences of military action. They must be prepared for the cost of rebuilding Iraq, as the President said he is committed to do. They must be prepared for the trade-offs that may be asked of them between competing priorities. They must be prepared for all these things and more, because no matter how well conceived, no matter how well thought out a foreign policy, it cannot be sustained without the informed consent of the American people. If it comes to that, if it comes to war, I fully expect the President will come back to the American people and tell us what is expected of us. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, when he met with the congressional leadership and committee chairs about 10, 15 days ago, I forget the exact date, we were all around the cabinet table. And at one point he turned to me and he said, "Mr. Chairman, what do you think?" And I said, "Mr. President, I'll be with you. If you make an earnest effort to go through the United Nations, you try to do this with our allies and friends, if in fact the UN does not support our effort, like we did in Kosovo, and if you're willing to be square with the American people, Mr. President, of what sacrifices we're going to ask of them, particularly the need to have significant number of American forces in place in Iraq after Saddam Hussein is taken down." And in the presence of all my colleagues at that meeting, he said, "I will do that." He has never broken his word. So, Mr. President, he's made two very important speeches so far. One to the UN and one to the American people about the danger of Saddam Hussein. But no one yet has told the people of Georgia, the people of Delaware, the people of this country what we will be asking of them, because it will be profound. It may be necessary, but it will be profound. As I said, if it comes to war, the President, I am confident, will go to the American people. In a speech last week, he made a compelling case that Iraq's failure to disarm is our problem as well as the world's. But as I said, he has not yet made the case to the American people that the United States may have to solve this problem alone or with relatively few people, or has he told us of the sacrifices that such a course of action will involve. I'm confident that he will do so if and when it proves necessary. But I also want to be clear here today, Mr. President, about the issues the President must address before committing our armed forces to combat in Iraq as a moral obligation to level with our people. First, the consequences of military action. Attacking Iraq could and probably will go smoothly. We have the finest fighting force in the world. Our defense budget exceeds that of the next 15 countries combined. According to expert testimony my committee received this summer, Iraq's conventional forces are significantly weaker than they were during the Gulf. And as a leading expert in the Middle East, Mr. Ajami told the committee, there is a strong likelihood that Iraqis would welcome us as liberators. But while it would be reasonable to expect the best, it would be foolhardy not to prepare for the worst. There is a danger in assuming that attacking Iraq will be, as some suggest, a cakewalk. We should all heed the powerful words of military analyst Anthony Cordesman, who testified before the Foreign Relations Committee in July. And here's what he said to my committee. I think it's incredibly dangerous to be dismissive of the difficulty. It's very easy to send people home unused and alive. It's costly to send them home in body bags because we did not have a sufficient force when we engaged. And to be careless about this war to me would be a disaster. This is not a game. It is not something to be decided from an armchair. End of quote. There is a danger in attacking Iraq. There's a danger that attacking Iraq could precipitate what we were trying to prevent: Saddam's use of weapons of mass destruction against our troops. My friend from Georgia who's presiding is a military man. He's a former Marine, and he's a tough guy, and he's level-headed and straight. He might be interested that last Sunday, as I came down to the memorial for firefighters, he knows I commute every day and I never come to Washington on Sunday. But there was a tribute to fallen firefighters, which occurs every year, and I was asked to speak. As I got off the train, I ran into a four-star, I don't want to identify him too closely, a four-star general in one of our branches who held a very high position very recently and still holds a very high position. And I asked him what he thought about this war possibility. And he said he did not like it. He said two things to me, and I say this to an ex-Marine sitting up there. He said, there's two things that will be fundamentally different than ever before. We have never gone to war in an environment that could possibly be totally contaminated before we get there. And number two, we have never gone house to house in a city of 4 million people. 4 million people. Mr. President, this all may work perfectly well. This all may go just so nicely. But to imply to the American people that that's a surety would be immoral, disingenuous, and would reap the whirlwind if it does not occur. The American people are tough. They will do what they think is necessary for our security, and they will make sacrifices. But I will be no part, if we go to war, of providing pablum to them that somehow this is going to be overwhelmingly likely an easy undertaking. If you notice, everybody says here the American people support this war. That's not true. They support this war if it's a 100-hour war like the last war was. They don't support the president's ability to go to war unilaterally. If you look at all the polling data, what they support is if we go with our allies in response to a genuine threat, which I think exists, and if it is not going to be costly in terms of the loss of human life, American soldiers, then they overwhelmingly support it. Over half still support it, even if there is loss of life. But hardly anyone supports it if it's alone, if they're not told, if there's a significant loss of life. As CIA Director George Tenet stated in a letter to Senator Graham just this week, and I quote, should Saddam conclude that a U.S.-led attack could no longer be deterred, he probably would become much less constrained in adopting terrorist actions. Such terrorists might involve chemical and biological weapons. Terrorism might involve chemical and biological weapons. Saddam might decide that the extreme step of assisting Islamist terrorists in conducting a WMD attack against the United States would be his best chance to exact vengeance, taking a large number of victims with him. End of quote. There's a danger that Saddam would seek to spark a wider war. I just did one of the shows we all do with Charlie Rose. He quoted to me what I knew privately from my discussions with him. The former commander of CENTCOM is testifying that he saw no need to go into Iraq now, and the cost would be high. There is a danger that Saddam would seek to spark a wider war. Many experts have expressed concern to my committee that if attacked, Saddam Hussein would lash out at Israel. Last month, the New York Times reported that Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon told senior administration officials that Israel would strike back if Iraq attacks Israel. Then, key Arab countries could come under tremendous pressure to break with us and confront Israel. It would be wrong for us to tell Israel that they should or should not do what they should or should not do in their self-defense, but it would also be wrong to ignore the risk that a war against Saddam Hussein will ignite a much larger conflagration. There is a danger that Saddam's downfall could lead to widespread civil unrest and reprisals. There's only one thing I disagreed with the president's speech on Monday. He said, what could be worse than Saddam? I can tell you a lot that could be worse. Mr. President, a parliamentary inquiry. Although I have the floor in my time, my recollection is the senator from Virginia gave me 20 minutes of his time. And I would ask unanimous consent that I'm able to proceed on the senator from West Virginia's grant of time to me.
Without objection.
I will not take all that time. Mr. President, as I said, there's a danger that Saddam's downfall could lead to a widespread civil unrest and reprisals. Chaos could invite the Kurds to seize valuable and viable oil fields, the Turks to cross the border in an effort to prevent a Kurdish state from arising, and Iran and even Syria to move in to fill the vacuum. No one of these scenarios is inevitable, but no one should be used, and none should be used as an excuse for inaction. But each must figure into our planning and in the minds of the American people if we ultimately use force against Iraq. We must be honest with the American people. In his speech this week, the President made it clear that if military action is necessary, the United States and our allies will help the Iraqi people rebuild their economy and create the institutions of liberty in a unified Iraq at peace with its neighbors. End of quote. Let me repeat that again. This is what the President said. The United States and our allies will help the Iraqi people rebuild their economy and create the institutions of liberty in a unified Iraq at peace with its neighbors, end of quote. Mr. President, this is a much more complicated country than Afghanistan. Mr. President, we have not done it in Afghanistan. Mr. President, we have not even kept our commitment in Afghanistan yet. So, Mr. President, we are taking on a big deal here. We may need to do it. I know the President, presiding officer, and my colleague from Ohio and my colleague from Vermont on the floor here know that Iraq is an artificially constructed nation. When has there been a circumstance in Iraq when there's been anything remotely approaching a democratic republic? I cannot think of it in the history of the Iraq as defined now. The Kurds are Indo-European Sunnis. The Sunnis are Arab Sunnis. The Shias that make up 60% of the population, primarily living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they are Shias who have been at war with the Sunnis. The Iranians are Shia. There are 600,000 Iraqi Shia in Iran. Mr. President, this is complicated stuff. But to listen to some of my colleagues on the floor who blithely blow this off like, no problem, take down Saddam, there's a James Madison waiting to step into the vacuum, we'll have a democratic republic, it will set a new tone and tenor for all, as the Vice President said, for all of the Middle East, because we'll have a new democracy there. Mr. President, that is a big deal. A big undertaking. Why did the President
He votes for it anyway.
Well, this is a critical commitment, one I wholeheartedly endorse, but it's not done out of altruism, but out of a hard-boiled calculation that in Iraq we cannot afford to trade a despot for chaos. No, but none of this will be cost-free. It's going to require a significant investment of military, financial, and human resources. Let's start with the cost of war. Last month, the White House economic advisor, Lawrence Lindsay, estimated the cost of a military campaign in Iraq at between $100 and $200 billion. Now, my friends on the floor here, we all are economic conservatives. Where are we going to get the money? I say to my friends, as I said in the committee, those of us who want to see a national health insurance policy, forget it for a while. Those of us on this floor who want to make permanent the president tax cut, forget it. Forget it for a while. As they say in parts of my state, we ain't got the money. Doesn't mean we shouldn't move on Iraq, but it means we should be honest with the American people. Honest with them and tell them what the estimated cost of this own administration is. By the way, that estimated cost reflects the same that the Congressional Budget Office suggested. The higher cost estimates result from a lengthy campaign and external factors such as a spike in oil prices if that occurs. And that's just to win the war, Mr. President. The cost of securing the peace could be significantly higher and could extend years in the future. On the other hand, maybe we'll end up with an Iraqi government to take place. There's plenty of money in Iraq. They can fund their own reconstruction, and that may happen. And I may not be facetious, but it is not anywhere near certain. I say could because there are those who believe that our commitment to Iraq the day after need not involve exorbitant expenditures. Former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger told my committee in August, and Secretary Rumsfeld repeated it last month, that the U.S. would not have to stay too long in Iraq. They and others argue that Iraq has a talented population, considerable resources to pay for its own reconstruction. The problem is, 1/3 of that talented population hates the other 2/3 of the talented population. They say Iraq will quickly be able to organize itself politically, economically, and militarily into a peaceful, unified nation free of weapons of mass destruction. But the American people need to know that most experts believe that Iraq will require considerable assistance politically, militarily, and economically. Indeed, they say we should speak not of the day after, but of the decade after. My committee heard testimony in July from military experts in post-conflict reconstruction, the fellow who headed up that department in the Pentagon, post-conflict reconstruction, who stated that 75,000 troops would be required at a cost of $16 billion for just the first year to maintain order, preserve Iraqi's integrity, secure its weapons of mass destruction sites. Just to do that. Just to do that. Other experts predict the United States will have to engage substantial resources in Iraq, which has no history of democracy, for many more years. So, Mr. President, when my cowboy friends say, you know, why do we need anybody? Let's go get them. I don't want all 75,000 of those forces being American. Anybody happen to notice recently that in Kuwait, American military personnel are being picked off? Anybody happen to notice that? Anybody happen to notice that the targets in Iraq, in Afghanistan? Where have we been? The American people need to know what the experts know, and we have an obligation, and the President has an obligation to tell them if the need arises. In a recent study in the Atlantic Monthly, James Fallows summed up the significant challenges that Iraqis will not be able to handle on their own. And I think this is overwhelmingly agreed upon by left, right, and center. He says they will not be able on their own to handle the following: cleaning up the after effects of battle and any malicious destruction Saddam may create with his chemical and biological weapons or by sabotaging his own oil fields. They'll need help to do that. Providing basic humanitarian needs in the short term, such as food, water, and medical care. 3, dealing with refugees and displaced persons. I told you there's 700,000 Shia in Iran. I mean, I know you knew that, but I remind you there's 700,000 in Iran. Catching Saddam Hussein if he tries to flee. We're still looking for Osama bin Laden. We're still looking for, Omar, the tent maker. We're still looking. We're still looking for these guys. We don't have them yet. providing police protection and preventing reprisal killings, denazification of the Ba'athist officials and security services, aiding in the formation of a new government, ensuring Iraqi territorial integrity and dealing with possible Iranian and Turkish intervention, rebuilding the oil industry while ensuring a smooth re-entry of Iraqi oil into the world market. They are a finite list of what everyone acknowledges no new government in Iraq could do quickly. Those who argue most vigorously that a post-Saddam Iraq can serve as a model and source of inspiration for democracy in the region and throughout the Muslim world must be prepared to back a massive long-term American commitment. To set that objective, but then to believe it can be done on the cheap, is a recipe for failure. Let me quote from Mr. Gingrich. Mr. Gingrich, this is a news report in the New York Times. It said, the advisors, who include House Speaker Gingrich and Mr. Pearl, argued that the White House should create a high-level interagency group to coordinate the military and reconstruction planning before an invasion takes place. That sort of powerful council could overcome the bureaucratic and philosophic divisions that have hindered reconstruction planning, the advisors contend. Quote, it was a mistake we made in Afghanistan, said Mr. Gingrich, who sits on the Defense Policy Board. Quote, you shouldn't go into a country militarily without having thought through what it should look like afterwards, end of quote. The mere fact these men are on the board are saying we should do this is evidence it's not been done yet. And we must be clear with the American people that we are committing to Iraq for the long haul, not just the day after, but the decade after. And finally, let's consider the possible trade-offs here. The President has argued that confronting Iraq would not detract from the unfinished war against terrorism. I believe he is right. We should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But if military action occurs and comes, it will take a Herculean effort for senior leaders of our government to stay focused on two major undertakings at once. War is intense. It often produces unintended consequences. A new front against Iraq must not distract us from the job number one, taking down al-Qaeda. And let's also be clear that this could involve sacrifices. For example, the war on terrorism is putting intense demands on Navy SEALs, Army Green Berets, Delta Commandos, Air Force ground controllers, and Arabic linguists. Units have been deployed in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Georgia, Yemen, Africa, and the Philippines. And last month, the commander of U.S. Special Operations Forces requested an additional $23 billion over the next 5 years to prosecute the war against al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, not Iraq. Our intelligence service have also redirected resources to the war on terrorism. How are we going to pay for all this? Can we take on Iraq, prosecute the war on terrorism, maintain the president's tax cut for the wealthiest Americans? Can we afford to repeal the estate tax for the top 2% of the population who pay it? What would be the national health insurance and prescription drug prospects and benefits in the near term? The point is, we will do what we have to do to protect our national security, but let's not kid ourselves that it can come down to cost-free, without trade-offs, and without setting priorities. Setting priorities and making hard choices is what governing is all about. So is being forthright with the American people about what's expected of them. We should not be afraid to ask our fellow Americans to sacrifice for vital cause if we conclude we should go to war. Generation after generation of Americans has done so willingly, and will do it again if that's what they're called upon to do, but we must be straight with them. In conclusion, Mr. President, few resolutions that come before the Congress are as grave and consequential as the one before us today. We've heard powerful arguments on both sides of the resolution and concerning the various amendments that have been presented, and that's how it should be. We've come a long way during the last year. An administration that many thought would ignore the United Nations, ignore the United States Congress, has and is seeking the support of both. We've come a long way in 3 weeks, a long way since the White House first offered its draft resolution. This resolution, resolution and the President's words make it clear that the administration's objective is to disarm Iraq, and that the rationale to enforce Iraqi's obligations to the United Nations is the reason we would go, and that its determination is to work with others, not alone. The President has made it clear that war is neither imminent or inevitable. And I am confident, Mr. President, the reason why the President thankfully, disregarding the advice of some in administration, understands the significant need for others to support us, is that fighting two wars, a war in Iraq and a war against terrorism, can be greatly assisted the more the world is with us. We do not need them if it comes to that, but the cost we will pay will be significantly higher. I compliment the President for recognizing that, and I am absolutely confident the President will not take us to war alone. I am absolutely confident that we'll enhance his ability to be able to get the world to be with us by us voting for this resolution, and I'm absolutely confident if it comes time and need to go to war with others or alone, the President will keep his commitment to make the third most important speech in his life, to come to the American people and tell them what is expected of them, what is being asked of them. To do any less would be to repeat the sins of Vietnam. And the sin of Vietnam, no matter what our view in Vietnam was not whether we went or didn't go. But the sin, in my view, was failure of two presidents to level with the American people of what the cost would be, what the continued involvement would require, and what was being asked of them. We cannot, must not, and if I have anything to do with it, we will not do that again. I thank the Chair for his consideration and his patience. I yield the floor.
And that was then Senator Joseph Biden, now the Vice President of the United States, shortly before he cast his vote to authorize President Bush to go to war against Iraq. You didn't think that's what he was going to do from listening to that, did you?
To me.
This is CPRmetro.org, Community Progressive Radio for the metropolitan New York area and the world, and we are commemorating this weekend the 10th anniversary, this past Friday, of the largest demonstration in human history, the war against the war that was about to begin, the protest against the war that was about to begin in Iraq. The protests took place in 800 cities across the country simultaneously. They were rolling, of course, so consecutively and simultaneously on February 15th, 2003. So up next, we're going to go to Washington, D.C., when the first protest leading up to the massive one in February and then the even larger one in March took place. This is October 28th, 2002, and this is C-SPAN's coverage of the anti-war rally that took place in Washington, D.C. Against the possible war, or the coming war, as it turned out, in Iraq. And we're going to take that out to the end of the program today, and tomorrow we will have more coverage, including the sounds of the actual protests, February 15th, 2003.
Bring you live coverage of an event in Washington. Gathered not far from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the group known as ANSWER, Act Now to End War and Racism, is holding a demonstration opposing a possible war against Iraq. Former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, Jesse Jackson, actor Ossie Davis are among those expected. Nearby, another group, the Free Republic Network, is holding a counter-demonstration called the Patriots Rally for America in support of U.S. troops. C-SPAN is taping that event, and we'll show it to you later today. Now, live coverage of the anti-war demonstration in Washington on C-SPAN.
Set together all the color, we all equal. So I'ma spread the love like this and drop it down just a tone. It's like I'm out here, can you hear me coming through the microphone? Hey yo, I got the answer. Act now, stop for end racism right here. I'm coming through clear. It's J3 as I appear from Chicago, Illinois. You see me everywhere. I represent for the Midwest. We out here on the East Coast. So I let my man pass the chest. Say no, blood for all y'all. Say no, blood for oil.
Everybody say no, blood for oil.
Come on, say no, blood for oil.
In the back, say no, blood for oil.
Come on, say no, blood for oil.
Over here, say no, blood for oil.
Come on, say no, blood for oil.
Oh yes, now am I standing clear? Let me come up here. I'ma come and rain like it in Washington, D.C. It's time to sign a peace treaty. From here to Tahiti, it's the primary check for the CD. It's how we go, I don't bang like a GD. We out here, and all people with the colors. I'm saying peace to all my brothers over east in the middle. I get so hot that I sizzle. They give us riddles, saying that we stupid. I'm looking at the translator. Let me feel into your heart like Cupid. Now, can everybody hear me? Am I speaking loud and clearly? See, I feel like this is Woodstock, but I'm not a Beatle. Now I'm gonna conquer all the negative evil that's around at the White House. I get hyped and I don't need this, so I get stressed out and I feed this to everybody up in D.C. Now if you hear black or white or Asian, or maybe of the Muslim persuasion, we tryna rock this, a standing ovation. Now everybody come scream dedication, say no, blood for oil.
Come on, say no, blood for oil.
Say no, blood for oil.
Louder, come on, say no, blood for oil. Let them hear you, come on, say no, blood for oil. I take it back, say no, blood for oil. Let them hear, say no, blood for oil.
Pump your fist just like this.
Say no, blood for oil.
Everybody pump your fist just like this.
Louder,
Everybody
say
pump
no,
your
blood
fist just
for
like
oil.
this. And just pump your fist just like this.
Over here, say no, blood for oil.
Say it.
This side, say no, blood for oil. In the middle, say no, blood for oil. Everybody together, say no, blood for oil. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, yes, yes. Make some noise for yourself. If you out here, use the restroom crowd. Everybody get loose, jump up and down. We the rubber in and we about to clown. Everybody get loose and jump up and down. Revolution time is here, don't frown. If you like it, just jump up and down. This be the revolution battle cry.
Hey yo, I try to take a stand, but I can't feel my legs. I'm a basket case filled with rotten eggs. I've gotten to the edge, been beyond and back. Matter of fact, I made a few contacts with supreme beings. In these dreams I'm seeking, so I'ma keep speaking till you knock knees weak until the odds ain't even, till the cause ain't breathing. I'm here to let you know the revolution ain't sleeping. The streets sweeping beyond the farthest region. I got the cure for fighting the common demon. I think back and remember my father's teaching, like be confident, humble for modest reasons. Now take heed to what this artist is teaching. My audience don't fall for market scheming. There's no secret to the success I'm achieving. My struggle is a game that sees no off season. V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry. V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry. V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry. V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry.
A conspiracy, a war order. Brothers don't know, so I order. Tell the real deal. It's ill how I feel. The world is playing that Lucifer's wheel. Time to reveal what's been candy coated. They handy with trick knowledge, leaving you demoted. Promoted, only temporary. Let tempers flare plus wary. Thoughts and emotions your mind can't carry. Prime must vary, 1,000 times wild. Bring it back to basics, high to mild. And livestock is a child. My style cheap choice after cola. With a rebel's profile, devil's profiles in a pit. It's so much bull in this path full of shit. I be that misfit unfit for Miss America. Now to knock it down like
V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry. V-I-C-T-O-R-Y.
Come on, this be the revolution battle cry.
V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry. V-I-C-T-O-R-Y. This be the revolution battle cry. Hey yo, I'ma come through a little clear. We on the White House lawn, can you really hear? I set it off like my name was Saddam. Forget Iraq, we gotta stop the dropping of the bomb. I set it off like that, it's J3. You're loving the way I spread the love and say these words. It's Prime Meridian. We need all of y'all support just like the Palestinians.
Yes. So open your eyes. Don't get cut like Enron. See, they got a disguise. So I'm gonna abolish. I'm the like Con Edison. What's up to the veterans up in Vietnam? Now Via dropped the bomb instantly. Essentially, I can't remain calm. See, they got us believing that Saddam is the enemy. Truth of the matter, Saddam looks more kin to me and you. So everybody, fuck that. We gotta do what we gotta do. And right now, we need money for jobs, not war. We need corn on the cob. We need food, clothing, and shelter. Yeah. For sure, y'all. Hey, peace out, y'all. Prime Meridian. Yes, yes, yes. Spread the love, y'all, for sure. Peace.
Say no, blood for oil. 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 Keep it going. No, blood for oil. Say no, blood for oil. Say no, blood for oil. Say no, blood for oil. No, blood for oil. Peace out.
Peace out. Prime Meridian. Peace.
Brothers and sisters, we have a call for folks who are volunteering for Project 300. If you know that you're with Project 300, go to the volunteer tables. It's to your right.
Okay. Got another announcement. We've got a grandmother backstage, and her name is Evelyn Galvin, and she's looking for Barry Galvin. So, Barry, come and meet Granny in the back, okay? All right, thank you.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. My name is Mara Verheyden-Hilliard. I'm an attorney and co-founder of the Partnership for Civil Justice, and I'm a member of the National Steering Committee for the Answer Coalition. The Bush administration has worked night and day to convince people that war is inevitable. They're trying to tell us that there is a consensus, that we all support the Bush administration, that we support George Bush and his global war drive. Now, Congress wouldn't stop this war, and the UN won't stop this war. But here we are, tens of thousands of people in the streets of Washington, D.C., of San Francisco, of countries all around the world. It's we, the people of the United States, we, the people of the world, we are the people that will stop this war. This is a truly massive demonstration today, and it's historic. It's a statement in itself, because today's demonstration is taking place before George Bush has launched his new global war of aggression, his new preemptive war, because we're coming out now, not waiting for the body bags, not waiting for more children to be killed. We're coming out now. And look in the historical context. 38 years ago, the U.S. Congress shamefully passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And then we learned in 1970 that that was all based on a lie, that the government had lied so that Lyndon Johnson could start his war and have the same license that the Congress today has just given to George Bush. But we're coming out now. We are here across from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and we honor those that were killed in that war, both U.S. soldiers and the people of Vietnam. But all you have to do is look at that memorial and see tens of thousands of names of people that were killed after the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, after the government of the United States had lied to the people so that they could launch a war. And we are here to say that George Bush does not have the authority for this war. He does not have unlimited war power. He is answerable to us. With this wonderful demonstration, we are launching a new grassroots movement. Did Congress speak for you when they voted for this war? Did any of the pollsters talk to you when they're coming out in the mass media and telling us that everyone's for this war? There has not been a real debate on this war, and there will not be a real debate or referendum on this war until everyone has heard from us. We are launching now the People's Anti-War Referendum. Everyone here can vote in that referendum, everyone across the United States. We say vote no war. Congress votes for war. We vote no war. You can go and get referendums. They're here today at the volunteer tables, at the tables that are set up at the front. You can get those referendums, fill them out, cast your real vote. Take them back to your neighborhoods and your communities. You can go online at www.votenowar.org. We will be getting millions and millions of votes in this People's Anti-War Referendum. We can do it. We've done it before. The people stopped the Vietnam War. It wasn't Congress. It wasn't President. It was all of us. And that's what we're doing here now. We're going to have a great rally today. We have a broad and diverse group of speakers from the well-known to the grassroots, because that's what this is all about. I'm honored to have up here today, co-chairing with me, Madi Bray, who is Executive Director of the Muslim American Society Freedom Foundation. He's been a tireless fighter for civil rights and social justice for decades, and he has been at the forefront of fighting this war drive and bringing the religious and communities of faith together to speak out against the war. Michel Shahadi is a co-chair here today. He is a member of the Free Palestine Alliance and of the steering committee in Los Angeles of the Answer Coalition. Michel is part of the LA8, the Palestinian deportation case, and he has fought for self-determination and for democracy. And also here today is Larry Holmes, another tireless and strong voice, a fighter for civil rights, a fighter who's been in the streets and in the trenches, a fighter who was with the International Action Center, and also a man who was a resistor in the Vietnam War. Thank you all. Vote no war. Vote no war. Vote no war. Vote no war. I'd like to introduce...
Vote no war. 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 Vote no war.
We are honored to have today, among our first group of speakers, veterans. Veterans who have fought in bloody wars and can speak honestly and speak the truth that George Bush knows nothing about what war really is. Woody Powell is a veteran of the Korean War. He is a co-author with his friend and former enemy in the Chinese army of a book about two soldiers from different cultures who share their lives through a very violent period of history titled To Walk the Golden Road. Woody now serves as the National Administrator of Veterans for Peace in the St. Louis headquarters. Please welcome Woody Powell.
Thank you. Good morning. When I listen to President George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney selling another war, I am struck with how impersonal, unemotional, and full of knowing they are. Knowing so much better than you and I what should be done to bring peace and democracy and freedom to the rest of the world. Knowing so much better than you and I the threats to our country's security. Knowing so much better than you and I the rosy outcome of a planned war in the Middle East. Knowing so much better than you and I how to draw reluctant allies into their plan because they know so much better than you and I how to play the global power game. Their knowledge is obviously superior to mine. What do we know, the veterans of those wars they are trying to sell? Only death, friends, enemies, and the millions of collaterals. Say children, say old folks, say women. Only the chill knowledge that we are as expendable as our bullets, despite memorials and parades and flags snapping smartly in the breeze. Only destruction, villages, cities, roads, bridges, the arteries of a country, the foundations of a culture, the spirit of a people. And what else do we know that those remote talking heads have never gone to war cannot know? How about fear and rage and depression and guilt? How about the cleansing sorrow that gives us the right and the obligation to speak aloud our most anguished pleas, not in my name, no more war?
Yes, indeed. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. All right, peace. That's what we're talking about today. Shalom, peace, wherever it is, peace. Right now, another veteran who's come to make a statement for peace. He was in the Gulf War conflict, and his name, and he's also the co-founder of Veterans for Common Sense. Please give a thunderous round of applause for Charles Miles.
We got a great turnout today. I want to thank everyone for being here. The reason you're here is the same reason I joined the military, because I loved my country. I fought in the Gulf War because I believed in my country. I was a 19-year-old private back then, combat troop. We went up into southern Iraq and we fought. You know, they don't ask 19-year-old privates what they think of the war. But that's what we have to decide back home, because we're the citizens who have to carry the message to Congress whether or not we want to go to war, because it's not up to the president, it's not up to Congress, it's up to the people. I'll tell you why veterans are questioning this war. Because it's unnecessary, because it's preemptive, because it's going to increase the risk of terrorist attacks against Americans. We've got no support from our allies for this war. There's no support from the rest of the world. The troops aren't protected. They're still using the same gas masks and the same chemical weapons detectors, all of the same lousy equipment that we had in 1991. That's what they're going to carry with them now. And you know what? They're going to get exposed to the same thing. Today, we're paying disability to 150,000 Gulf War veterans, $2 billion a year that you're paying to sick veterans because they weren't properly protected last time around. Do you think it's going to be any different? I'll tell you what, if you're going to commit the troops to war, you got to make sure you're doing the right thing. If you're going to kill thousands of civilians, you got to make sure you're doing the right thing. If you're going to wreck our country's economy to go to war, you got to make sure that you are doing the right thing. Well, this is the wrong thing.
You people are very beautiful. The sight from here is really tremendous. Our next speaker is a fighter for peace. She's the Vice President of Vets for Peace. Her name is Ellen Barfield.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to look out and see all of you. I served in Korea too, although you're probably thinking, gee, she's too young for that. I served in 1980 in Korea. I was part of the occupation force, which is still in Korea because of our imperialist intentions by this government. And when I was in Korea, there was a massacre of over 2,000 civilians in the city of Gwangju. Now, it was Korean troops who killed those people because there had been a coup the year before and they objected to it. But the U.S. troops were standing right behind them, backing up the intention that the U.S. government would not let the Korean people run their own nation. That kind of behavior is what the U.S. has been all about for a long time. I have traveled to Iraq 3 times, once with the Veterans for Peace Iraq Water Project, which I'm very, very proud of. We Veterans for Peace have carried money and workers to Iraq to help rebuild water treatment facilities. Thank you. We're very proud of that. It's only a few of us, and we've only rebuilt 4 plants, but about 100,000 people have clean water now. That's what we need to do for Iraq, rebuild the country, which they haven't been allowed to do for 12 years. Let them get back to business as usual. Let them get back to their regular lives. Then they will be able to get a new leader on their own. We have no right to choose for them. No war!
Thank you, sister. You know, we have media not only in this country, but from all over the world. People from the Middle East are looking. People from Asia, from Africa, Europe, Latin America, everywhere. And they want to know, do we support Bush's war? Do we love our sisters and brothers throughout the world? Do we want to make war on them? Do we want to dominate them? Do we want to conquer them? Do we want to occupy their lands? Do we want solidarity, friendship, love, and equality with the rest of the world? Thank you. Our next speaker is a Vietnam veteran, Brother Frank Hood.
It's an honor, a great honor, to represent veterans that are for peace in sight of the Vietnam Memorial. I learned one thing from my experience in the Vietnam War. That is that the use of force and violence begets more force and violence. War begets war. Problems aren't solved, they're created. People have asked me, why am I here? I'm here to represent my organization, Veterans for Peace, but what I'm really here for is to be counted, just like the rest of you. Look at us, George Bush. Count us. We say your plans for war are wrong-headed. No war on Iraq, no war.
I am honored today to introduce an attorney, a courageous fighter that represents strength to so many people. And it's a particular honor for me to introduce her because I'm a National Lawyers Guild attorney. And the National Lawyers Guild, as many of you know, has always and historically been out there first and foremost to defend and fight for the right of people to express dissent and to have progressive change in this country. We have with us today a woman, because she has been willing to defend those that the government targets for prosecution and to provide them the defense they're entitled to. She herself has now been targeted by Attorney General John Ashcroft for prosecution. Where is she? Okay. Please welcome Lynn Stewart.
I can't claim to be a veteran like the people who have spoken before me, who have really suffered by war, but I too am a veteran of 40 years in this struggle, and I say to everyone here, we are at a point where if we don't stop them now, our future is destroyed. We must stop their war machine. We said in the 60s, I will not serve. I will not do your bloody work. And to hear the young people here saying the same things both saddens me and encourages me, because I do believe this is a protracted struggle, a struggle that we carry on. But I see that we are at a point where if we don't stop them, our brothers and sisters all over the world will be annihilated for their greedy view of history. They tell us they hide behind the fear of the people. They hide behind 911 and tell us they will protect us. Our friends, our relatives, our co-workers hear these words. But you know, last weekend I was interviewed on radio by a young man who for 22 years has not been able to do his work as a radio interviewer, and I mean Mumia Abu Jamal. Free Mumia! And in this, I hope, conjunction of history, to which I don't know who was more anxious to talk to whom, I said to Mumia, they who claim to protect us have made it impossible to protect us. The death squads that have run rampant in Latin America, the bombing of Iraq, back to, I believe there was a person who said in the 60s, the Stone Age. War criminal Kissinger was the author of that, and now they would like to do that again, and we are what stands between them and being able to stop this war. I have my own troubles, as some of you may know. Ashcroft has singled me out to be the leader in the war against the destruction of the Constitution. That is also on their agenda. The Unpatriot Act is their vehicle. Trump sucks. And Trump sucks. General Ashcroft and his crony in the White House would like it that if you are an activist, there will be no lawyers to call. They will be locked up. And we have seen this happen in Peru. We have seen this happen around the world. They take up the lawyers and in that way believe they can defeat the movement. I stand here to defend the right to defend. We are gathered together And I say to you, go back, let us go back to wherever we are from around this country. There are the people who have the ears to hear what we are saying. It is time for a new populism to take root, not within the Democratic Party, not within the Republican Party, but among the people. Okay? Our job is to rouse the people. Go back, be cranky, make trouble, say things. Get the thought processes working. No blood for oil.
No blood for oil. No blood for oil. No blood for oil. No blood for oil. No blood for oil.
Thank you.
No blood. There you go. All right, another big hand for Lynn Stewart. Come on, give it up. Another big hand for Lynn Stewart. You know, one of the sad things about this is that we are still continuing. We're saying, let's stop the war before we start, but in reality, we know, those of us, many of us know, the war has never really stopped. Every day, they're dropping bombs, and every day, children and civilians are dying in Iraq. The war has not stopped, but we are not going to let you escalate. We are not going to let you go one more step. George Bush, the people, united, will never be defeated. 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 That's right. That's right. Right now, I want to bring to the stage Stephanie Shendell, who is working with Voices in the Wilderness. They've been going to Iraq many times. Let's hear for Voices. They've been doing courageous work. Kathy, Danny, Stephanie, so many of them doing courageous work, speaking truth to power. They have a special tour they're doing. It's called Look in the Mirror. It's called The Mirror of Truth. We have a tape back here. We want you to cue the tape up. And please meet and greet Stephanie with Voices in the Wilderness, please.
The voices you just heard are children that live in Baghdad that I had the privilege of spending the holidays with last December. Dua, Hebe, and Mahmoud, who continue to live and struggle and survive with smiles on their faces despite the fact that all their lives they know nothing but warfare coming from this side of the world. And I just hope, I know the bombs don't have names, I don't know how they will be protected, and that's why it's so important that we are all here today. And I wish that my Iraqi friends could see what I am seeing now. I wish we could send the images of these thousands of faces, send the energy that is pulsing through this city right now. Because I know, based on every time that an Iraqi told me, we love the American people and we know that you are not your government, that they would believe. That they would believe that hundreds of thousands of us here in the U.S. stand with them against sanctions and bombs, against the insane drive of the U.S. government to wage yet another unjust war against them. I work with Voices in the Wilderness, and we're a campaign to end the sanctions against Iraq. All the work that we do, we advocate through nonviolent resistance, creative nonviolent resistance. We stand opposed to war, the proliferation of weapons, aggression, and we stand for dialogue, negotiation, and face-to-face diplomacy. And we're currently traveling the East Coast with the Mirror of Truth tour, where not only are we speaking about against the ongoing warfare that has never ended since 1991 and against an escalation of a new war, but we're also outing the hypocrisy of the U.S. administration, forcing us making us think about Iraq's supposed weapons of mass destruction. When we live in a country that is producing more chemical, biological, nuclear, and conventional weapons than any other country in the world. Whether it's Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey, where they're producing the DU that was used in 1991 Gulf War and continue to produce it. Whether it's the American Type Culture Collection in Manassas, Virginia, where Saddam Hussein got his anthrax in the 1980s. We've been there and we're going there. And here, right here, you can see, and you can get it from our bus, the colorful bus just over there on Constitution. United we stand against war. You can get this list and find out for yourselves what's happening in our backyards, what's happening in our names, and how much more terror and destruction is going to be exported around the world. And we'll do all of this again to stand with humanity, to stand on the side of the Iraqis and the Afghanis and the Palestinians and the people here that don't have enough to eat. And so please continue in your communities, at gas stations, at the places where weapons are produced, and in public spaces. Do not be silent. We cannot go away. Thank you so much.
We talked about children because we know that our children, if we look at our children, they're healthy, they're looking well. I looked at my little Zara. She's only 2 months old. She's so healthy, alive, and well, and doing well. But there's another Zara. There's a Zara in Baghdad, and she's not healthy, and she's not doing well, and her growth has been stunted. And we're paying that price. I think one of the things that we have to remember, Thomas Jefferson once said, I tremble for my nation when I think that God is just. I tremble for my nation when I think that God is just. So, brothers and sisters, right now, speaking on behalf of the children, I want to bring to the stage, I think I know this young man. I'm his dad. His name is Allende Bray.
My name is Allende Bray, and I'm only 7 years old. And even I know that peace is better than war. No war in Iraq. 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 No war in Iraq.
No war in Iraq. Out of the mouths of babes. Out of the mouths of babes. No war in Iraq. That's what the children are saying. Bush, we're saying, you know, bombs over Baghdad, children die, mothers cry, and we say, for the love of God, why? No war in Iraq.
My name is Hamza Muhammad, and I attend Masjid al-Islam. No war in Iraq.
Okay, that's it. Okay. Nope, you did good enough. Okay.
It's my privilege to introduce an activist that I've known for over 30 years, a groundbreaking activist who's been at the forefront of every progressive cause and issue that I can think of. She's one of the co-founders of Rainbow Flags. Let me introduce Leslie Feinberg.
"35 years ago, an activist handed me a leaflet for an anti-Vietnam War protest. And I thought, what can I do about it? I'm a teenaged gay factory worker. I have no power in this society. Well, I was wrong. Behold the power of the people. It's not just our huge numbers today that makes us powerful. It's our unity. It's that we're Muslims and Jews together. We're women and men together. We're gay and straight together. We are able-bodied and disabled together. We are older generations who know a lot, but not everything. And youth who have a lot to learn and a lot to teach. Solidarity. Solidarity is what cements us together. It's our strength. And Bush and Ashcroft know that too. That's why they'll try to divide us, to pit us against each other. The way McCarthy in the 1950s used red baiting and gay baiting and anti-Semitism during the 1950s anti-communist witch hunt. The way Nixon and the FBI unleashed a dirty war to break up the movements in the 1960s and 70s. So here is my pledge for unity. As a U.S. anti-war activist, I stand up for the people of Iraq against the Pentagon. As a Jewish revolutionary, I continue to fight for Palestinian freedom. Zionism is my enemy too. As a leader in the lesbian, gay, bi, and trans movement, I stand shoulder to shoulder with my Muslim, Arab, and South Asian sisters and brothers against Ashcroft's racist roundups and trampling of civil liberties. As a militant trade unionist, I stand with my longshore sisters and brothers against Bush. Bush wants to use his weapons of mass distraction to divert us from the capitalist economic crisis. He doesn't want us to realize that we're the ones that do the work of the world every day. And we have the power to stop work and shut down this system to halt the war. So I end. Now it's your turn, all of you here and the millions who are watching around the world. Will we stand up for unity? Then behold the emerging power of the people.
Caesar Bush is telling us that this is a war to bring security to us. Do you believe him? He's saying that this is a war to bring democracy to the people of Iraq. Do you believe him? No! But do you believe that this is a war for big oil? Yes! Our next speaker is a representative of a community that is working against the war. He is a representative from the Korean American community, representative of the Congress of Korean Reunification. His name is Kwan Ho Choi. Please welcome him.
This is great. Sisters and brothers, on behalf of the Korean American community, I would like to extend our solidarity to you who are here for one purpose, which is to stop the war in Iraq before it starts. Really, this is not only about $200 billion, which is the cost estimated for the war, but the real question should be whether our government has the legal and moral right to wage the war, destroy the nation, replace the government, and thus alter the fate of the people of Iraq to satisfy the oil thirst, greed of the corporate America. Meanwhile, U.S. bombing continues still after 12 years. The U.S.-led UN sanctions in Iraq costed more than 1.5 billion innocent Iraqi lives, including women and children. If U.S. Congress will not, and UN Security Council cannot, then it is our job to stop the government's madness. We Koreans suffered a war 50 years ago, led by U.S. against the will of Korean people. The peace treaty is not just signed, the nation is still divided. The U.S. still maintains its troops in South Korean soil. And I'll tell you, my friends, our struggle will continue. Today, October 26th of 2002 will be remembered by many for many years to come as the day the people of U.S. stood up in solidarity against unjustified, inhumane war of aggression toward Iraq. And the Korean American community is very proud to be a part of this history of struggle against U.S. global imperialism. Thank you.
We are a wonderful and diverse and powerful organization of people out here in the streets today. I have the greatest advantage because I'm up here and I can see how huge this rally is, and I can see how beautiful everyone is out here today. We have with us today in the streets across the United States representatives of labor, the people who represent the workers, the people who are going to refuse this war. And here is our next speaker, is Gene Bruskin, Secretary Treasurer, Food and Allied Services Trades.
Good morning. It's great to see everybody. Shortly before his death, George Meany, who was president of the AFL-CIO during the Vietnam War and a strong supporter of that war, said that had he known what he knew later in his life, he would have taken a different stand. The labor movement must learn from George Meany. The good news is that there are a lot of indications that we are. Labor Against the War coalitions have sprung up in New York City, in Detroit, in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, in Vermont, and in cities around the country. Union labor councils have passed resolutions in San Francisco, Albany, Rochester, Utica, Washington State, and a number of other cities. The Service Employees Union in Wisconsin has come out against the war. The Teamsters in Chicago have come out against the war. The teachers in California have come out against the war. The United Electric Workers National Union has come out against the war. It's a movement from the grassroots, and while it's still small, it's growing rapidly. It's been said, and I agree, that this is a war, that war is an extension of politics. And we know Bush's politics are to fight for the right of corporations here and abroad. Bush says this is a war in the national interest, but it's not in the interest of workers who don't have health insurance. It's not in the interest of workers around the world living on $2 a day. It's not in the interest of retired workers that don't have retirement plans, or of unemployed workers dying of AIDS, or of poor people who don't have enough books in their schools. It's not in the interest of the ILWU trying to protect their livelihood. And it's not in the interest of workers' children, including my 12-year-old daughter, who want to live a life of happiness and peace and fulfillment. Bush's war is a Trojan horse to attack the labor movement and the people's movement. It's a war to make the world safe for General Motors, for General Electric, for General Mills, and for many of Bush's generals leading his war team. It's time for the labor movement to define our interests separate from Bush's crowd. Let us generate a powerful solidarity movement that will make our families proud to live in the 21st century. Thank you.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Come on. All right. All right. Let's try this. I want to ask you a question. War. What is it good for? Absolutely. War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Okay, Cheney and Bush, did you hear that? Right now, brothers and sisters, I want to introduce a young dynamic person. She's a member of the Answer Coalition. She's a youth organizer extraordinaire. She does a great job. She's also a Howard University student. Oh, Howard in the house? All right. And she kicked butt on C-SPAN this morning. Please welcome Paida Lindsay.
And she was the presidential candidate of the Party for Socialism and Liberation last year.
Youth from all over the country in overwhelming numbers have come out. It's crucial that we be here en masse. The people of the United States who know that this war is not in our interest, it is not in the interest of the people in Iraq, and we will not fight for the interests of big oil. Just this morning, as he mentioned, I was featured on a national call-in television show discussing student opposition to the war in Iraq. And call after call, coming from people all across the country, declared that they knew while Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and the rich white college students sitting across the desk from me were calling for this needless war, not a goddamn one of them will be sent to fight it.
Ain't that true?
They do not stand to lose their sons and daughters. It is us. It is our communities that will be the most hard hit. It is our schools that go underfunded. It is our families that don't have health care and can't find jobs. And for what? Go amongst the ranks of the military today and ask them if they hold stock in major weapons companies. Ask the soldiers if their father's on the board of Texaco, Exxon, Mobil, and the answer will be no. And so we will stand and fight here, today, against the Bush administration's policies. We will stand and fight for our sisters and brothers all over the world. And this is just the beginning. Today is just the manifestation of a huge movement that grows huger every day. A movement that stands in solidarity with the people of the world, that votes no war, and that demands no blood for oil.
No blood for oil!
Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again, y'all. Look out. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Listen to me.
going to do it for this part of our coverage, memorializing February 15th, 2003. On Sunday, we'll have another 6-hour segment, so come back and check it out. We'll be replaying this segment today, Saturday. This is CPRmetro.org. CPRmetro.org.